Okay, me and Ryan recently were discussing an ever growing problem in our society. And that problem is the social justice warrior,
There's a lot of them.
and they're growing day by day.
They're like Hydra.
Yeah, you can't take them out, they'll multiply.
Cut off one head, two take its place.
Yeah, they're just talking heads. They wait around and they lurk for to ambush you. They wait for you to say a key word, and they'll pounce on you like piranhas.
Anything that's politically incorrect, and politically incorrect, let me clarify, is a term that gets a lot of flack from the left. They say that political correctness or criticism of political correctness is just an excuse to say anything you want without being called an a-hole. But the fact of the matter is, political correctness is a way to enforce certain ideologies.
Exactly, and it's a way they could stop the debate, pigeonhole the a whole topic, because they could simply label you as racist, homophobic, xenophobic, whatever it is. They just say that, and most people will just hush hush about it.
Yeah, it's a way to shut down discussion as opposed to actually promote it. Honestly, it's because they're afraid to debate the actual subject.
Yeah, and a lot of the people who carry out their ideals are what we would call a social justice warrior. It just seems like a lot of these people do not think for themselves. They're basically, I don't know if they're knowingly taught this or if inadvertently they're influenced by this. They will basically leech onto you.
Yeah, they what they are is they're enforcers of doctrine, and in this case, it's not doctrine of a religion, but it's doctrine of a political ideology, and in this case, the American left, and the American left likes to employ different tactics using race, gender, uh, income, any way they can to divide us, and then they attach stigmas to talking about these subjects.
Yes, a few examples for our country, for example. Christianity is fair game to insult and make fun of and ridicule. But whenever Islam is brought up, that is a big no no. There's a big wall brought up.
Because then you're an Islamophobe or a xenophobe. See, this is what we're talking about, the key words, because it could be a good, rational, logical discussion about the matter, but then they shut you down by labeling you an Islamophobe, basically implying that you hate the people, when in fact you're really talking about ideas.
Yeah, and I really do not like that because, I mean, I do not agree with the tenets of Islam, but I know obviously this is one thing they like to counter a lot, but I do have so it's okay. I do have Muslim friends. I know that's one thing they teach their followers to look at. As,
Brian, you can't say you have Muslim friends, because that's just a lie.
exactly that they teach their followers that's something that we would bring up for us to say something more offensive. They think it's a tactic we use to say something more offensive. But I'm definitely trying to say and differentiate between a Muslim and Islam. Islam is an idea. A Muslim is a follower of that religion.
Right. You can hate Islam without hating the Muslim.
Exactly, and that's why I don't like. It's like our society is so divided. Just because you do not agree with the left, it doesn't mean you can't be friends with people like that. It doesn't mean
Right.
you automatically hate them. Obviously, if you don't like Judaism, doesn't mean you hate all Jews. If you don't agree with Hinduism, doesn't mean you hate all the Hindus and all the people in India. I mean,
Nor should you.
but they love to just. It's like you bring something up, they automatically shut off. Like part of their brain shuts off, and they go into attack mode.
Yeah, it's really a way of controlling the discussion in such a way that prevents actual progress from occurring. So, like, let's say you talk about um, some of the tenets of Islam include being able to lie as long as it advances Islam. If you bring that up and suddenly someone says, "Oh, you're just an Islamophobe," that is a social justice warrior that is just trying to shut you down. They're trying to shut down any discussion because it doesn't click with the leftist doctrine, which honestly, I'm not exactly sure why they even believe that on this particular subject, because normally there's some advantage attached to it. Like if you bring up race, it's a way for them to target minority voters by being able to call the other side racist. But in this case, like, Muslims don't even make up a good portion of the population, so it's not that's obviously not the motivation here.
Yeah, and also back to the race thing. It's another big misconception. They think a Muslim is a race. It is not. There's white Muslims. There's plenty of them in Albania and in Eastern European countries. There's plenty of black Muslims. Plenty, obviously. The Arab Muslims are the majority. I mean, they're the minority. Excuse me.
Yeah,
And they automatically, if you talk about an idea, that it's like one of their tactics. They just like to label you a racist, and I do not know where they get that from.
well, and ironically, you can turn it around on them by simply pointing out that, hey, are you calling all Muslims Arab? Are,
Yeah.
are you the racist? Are you the one stereotyping? Now, honestly, I don't believe that's the case, because most of the time the criticisms of Muslims are directed towards Muslims that exist in Arabic nations that are radicalized to the point of violent extremism.
Yes, because the thing is, we really need to have an open, fair discussion here because obviously, not all of them are like that. Obviously, I think we both agree on that.
Oh yeah,
Clearly, not all Muslims are like this. But there is a significant group that does follow the Quran, the Hadiths, the Sunnah, all their holy books to the T. They believe every single aspect of it and they follow it literally. And some of those things are good. Like some of the beliefs are really good for helping out the poor through charity, and some of it is more intolerant.
yeah. Ironically, the American left leaves out the fact that the feminism aspect of their movement and the gay rights aspect of their movement would be totally negated if Islam was institutionalized in America. No, uh, none of the Islamic systems in the world are tolerant towards women or gays.
Yes, you have countries out there where it's illegal for them to basically chop off a homosexual's head, or they'll gather him to a high area and just throw him off to his death, his or her death. And it's crazy how that's just ignored. Like there's plenty of rational thinking Muslims who are afraid for their lives to speak their mind. They have to go into hiding in some of these countries. They cannot question anything, and they can't question their imams. They can't question some of these mobs out there that are controlling certain areas where they live at, or they'll get thrown into jail, or even worse, death.
Yeah, and see, that's why I was so on the fence about this refugee crisis, because a lot of them do need our help, and you want to be able to open your heart to that, but at the same time, you could be inviting the bad guy in through the back door. And so I've always been kind of on the fence about that issue, but it's ironic because if you look at real, true, true blue liberals, they're honestly as worried about Muslims as blood red conservatives, um, and they ought to be. Take Bill Maher for example. He takes a hardline stance about Islam, and that's admirable because it is inconsistent with their beliefs, and yet it's culturally accepted.
Yes, he is a true liberal about almost everything, and that's what I appreciate about him. He's not. There's a movement going on now that we call them the regressive left because they'll be really progressive about something, but then wholly regressive in another thing. And it's just, it baffles me. Like I get speechless sometimes when I hear some of the arguments.
Yeah, it's really just it's pathetic, honestly, and one of the things we'd like to really elaborate on here is the ability to point out when a social justice warrior is being a social justice warrior, when they're shutting down discussion instead of talking about the topic at hand, when
Or, well, I'm sorry.
and of course when they're actually participating in the discussion, it's actually valuable. But you have to be able to recognize the when one or the other is happening.
Like, usually they like to shut it down. Another tactic I forgot to mention is they'll deflect. They'll be like, "Oh, what about the Bible? What about the Old Testament?"
Yeah, and there are ways to defend that, and honestly, the best answer though is not to defend it, but to say rather, hold on, let's stay on subject. We'll talk about that at another point. That's fine. We can bring it up in another discussion. But right now, we're talking about Islam. So deflection is not a defense. If two people get involved in different hit and runs at the same time on the same street, and one of them dies and the other's injured, and the police come to arrest the guy that hit the other pedestrian that was injured, he can't just point across the street and go, "Well, look at him. He killed him." It's not a defense. Those actions are parallel to one another. They can't be compared.
Exactly. Even if you do decide to go talk about certain things in the Old Testament, that's basically they like to bring up a lot of things what they would call Mosaic law, laws for Jews of the time to follow. But here's the thing: how many Jews now do you see actually following these old Mosaic laws from 3,000 years ago?
And if you want to talk about specifically the Bible, you have to consider that Jesus got rid of uh, the qualifications for making pure or the punishments of the Mosaic law. The only thing that is still left of the Mosaic law to the Christian is the aspect of what constitutes good character, good judgment, and a lack of sin. Those factors are still in play, but the punishments and the processes of the Mosaic law are no longer in effect for Christians. So if you want to talk about specifically the Bible, that doesn't even count.
Yes, because that's what makes a Christian a Christian. Is the New Testament is their ultimate authority. Jesus is the ultimate, basic. It's the ultimate figure they follow, in a way. It's the Old Testament's important. It's kind of more of historical context for Christians, but they mainly follow the teachings of Jesus Christ in the New Testament. That's what you need to judge them on. Is that mainly?
Right. You can't just pigeonhole parts of scripture and call it the whole. Now, the Quran is quite a different story because it seems to be kind of consistent in its radicalism. Um, and there are no such caveats. There are no such exceptions in the Quran for its kind of extremism. In the New Testament of the Bible, Jesus tells you some forms of scripture are no longer in effect. When he said, "You've heard it, eye for eye, tooth for tooth." Well, that's an Old Testament concept. But he said, "No, not eye for eye, tooth for tooth." He told he told people to love their neighbor and to turn the other cheek. You know, but Islam has no such caveat. When they say eye for eye, tooth for tooth, they mean eye for eye, tooth for tooth.
Yeah, a way different form of justice. Way different.
Yeah, and if you want to know what happens when you follow that, just take a look at the nations that actually operate under Sharia law.
Yeah, and some countries will even interpret their own laws. Well, they'll go to extra materials. They got these books called the Hadith. There's various authors of Hadiths that they use, and sometimes they'll use in material in there to make some of their laws from. I believe there's in Pakistan there's a blasphemy law because in the Hadiths there was actual people who insulted Muhammad, whether through directly to his face or through poetry, and they basically met an untimely end. So in some countries like Pakistan, for example, if you're even accused of being saying anything remotely insulting to their prophet, you are pretty much toast.
And let's not forget that Sharia law is different than the American justice system. Here, if you are accused, you have the right to face your accuser. You have the right to due process. You have to argue your case before a court. You're innocent until proven guilty. These are factors of American law that were developed through decades and centuries of British law, and then were modified and rebuilt in America. And they don't exist to that degree there.
Yeah.
Their burden of proof is different. Their parameters for what is true and what is not true is different than what we have here.
Yeah, they do have a court system. It's completely different though.
It's structured totally different.
Yeah, like for example, like a woman's testimony is not as much as a man, and she has to get multiple witnesses to prove that she's been raped, for example.
And obviously, rape is not going to take place in the public square, so
Yeah.
it's not like she's going to get multiple witnesses
Yeah.
to begin with.
Absolutely. And there is some good laws that they do have out there, but I mean,
Every justice system does have good laws.
yeah,
I mean, obviously, no one's going to argue with not stealing.
yeah, obviously. But I mean, it's just like the bad outweighs the good. They do have good things in there, but it's like, say if I mow your grass and I I get you groceries or whatever, but then I burn your house down. I mean, you're gonna forget all the nice things I've done for you.
Right.
I know that's a pretty poor example, but it's just it can be that extreme. I mean, people are losing their lives for some things us Westerners would deem really, really,
Trivial.
yeah, trivial.
You know, it's and that's just the subject of Islam. In the subject of race, what they try to do is keep minority blocks in their court by promising to get rid of oppression and poverty and stuff like that. When in fact, if you look at the liberal cities, like um,
Chicago,
Chicago, yes, that's the
Detroit.
word I was trying to say. Detroit. These places have been under liberal rule for a long time, and look at them. They're obviously not trying to do that. What they try to do, though, is get minorities to think that the opposition is against them. And they do this by creating ways of white shaming. They do this by enforcing certain types of speech. They do this by allowing the social justice warriors and even the minority communities themselves to shut down discussion about real issues by simply attaching race to it, like voter ID laws.
Absolutely, and that is a big issue. Like they,
No, it's not, Brian. It disproportionately affects minorities.
yeah.
You're racist.
See, I mean, that's how it would happen. Like, even if like I didn't get a full sentence out, I would I would get leached on instantly, and it's really unfortunate. You can't have a proper discussion with some of these people, because they have some things they have, some ideas they have is kind of a twisted reality. Like for example, the voter ID. You need an ID for almost anything. You need an ID to buy alcohol. You need an ID get
Drive.
to drive. ID to get in some clubs. ID to get some other things. For a mortgage. There's a lot of things you need an ID for.
So that people can verify you are who you say you are and you're capable of doing what you're trying to do.
Yeah, even to get a job for the most of the time. It's just, I mean, I can understand where they're coming from if there was no free way for them to get it. But when this law was passed,
In North Carolina.
North Carolina, we're from North Carolina, so they actually gave them about a 4 year, it was a 3 to 4 year span to actually get this. And even if they had to pay for it, it was like $10, something around there. Not exactly $10, but it was approximately $10. And there was also ways to get it for free.
About 13 with tax and everything. But see, here's the thing. Like even if it was $13 flat for everyone, if you can't get $13 in 4 years, you have other problems.
Yeah. Well, the bigger issue is there's a big denial that voter fraud happens. I mean, they deny it happens at all. They it's a crazy idea to think that human beings do not cheat.
If you've ever played a game of Monopoly, you know voter fraud happens.
Yeah, I mean, it's
Your own family can stab you in the back over a fake $5 bill. I think a politician can rig an election.
yeah. I honestly think, yeah, I honestly think if they can make if this does not infringe on the right to vote, if they make it for make a way for it to be public, for everybody to know this. Right now, I'm seeing
Billboards
billboards,
everywhere.
radio ads. It's everywhere. There's ways for them to get it for free, so it's not preventing them from doing so.
What it's preventing is people who are already dead from voting. It's preventing people from voting multiple times. It's preventing, and again, it's absolutely ludicrous for somebody to assume that people don't cheat. I mean, I think all of conservatism is based on the idea that people abuse power. Power corrupts, minuscule power corrupts, absolutely. So the fact of the matter is, people are going to cheat. And these social justice warriors try and shut down the conversation by making it about race. Even though it's not really about race, it's about preventing voter fraud. Now, it tells you something about the character of the person who is trying to prevent you from preventing voter fraud.
Yeah, it for people like-minded like us. It it leaves you speechless sometimes when you hear what they have to say. You're stunned. You're paused for a moment. You're like you stutter. You're like what? I mean, am I right? Is this like
Yeah,
it's like okay, cheating does not happen? It baffles me. They put way too much trust in people.
yeah, and honestly, I think that a lot of liberalism is about putting too much trust in people. I think that liberalism has an overall flowery, unrealistic view of humanity, and which is ironic considering their stance on the police. You think, like I said earlier, power corrupts, minuscule power corrupts, absolutely. Um, wouldn't police be a good example, in their viewpoint, of government being oppressive?
Yeah, absolutely. You would think that would be the case, but apparently it's not. That's another thing that's really alarming. They're not being
Objective?
objective and specific about it. They're not saying some police officers are corrupt. They're basically putting it into the way where everybody is afraid of every single police officer that drives by them. You know, when the siren goes off, you sweat, you panic. You know, it's just today's the day I'm going to die. You know what I mean? It's that bad in
And,
some situations.
and if you get agitated and violent yourself, then it becomes a self fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah,
And think about it from the officer's perspective. If people are pissed at you all the time, and you've got, this whole movement against cops, you're going to be on edge.
yeah. I mean, just think of like you had a long day as a cop. You're tired. Most of these people have families. Say like you have a newborn child. You're a cop. You're tired. You didn't get to sleep at night. Then you go to your job. You're already stressed out as it is from family life. Then you're dealing with people lying to you all the time. You're on high stress situations. Your life could be on the line. You're dealing with people you don't know what the heck they have in their cars. You don't know what they have in their pockets. You do not know what they're thinking. That's the worst thing about human beings is you do not know what they're thinking.
Yeah, exactly. And honestly, they're put in a lot of situations where, you know, if somebody's being belligerent and loud and disrespectful, and you have all this going on and in the back of your mind, and then you hear about cops being shot, you know, I think you would have your hand near the trigger. Which is exactly what we don't want. If we make police feel comfortable, then we can feel comfortable around police. It's a both ways situation, and I agree the opposite is also true. If the police can be comfortable around us, we can be comfortable around them. But it is not a one way thing. It is a two-way street. We have to teach our children how to respond to police officers, how to be respectful to police officers, just as they have to be taught to be respectful to us. And they are. You just don't see it happen, so you just assume it doesn't.
Yes, I mean they're doing their job for the most part, and there has to be mutual respect on both parties. I've noticed. I've even gotten out of. I've gotten warning tickets because I was respectful and honest.
Now you can't trust anything he says. He's a criminal.
Yeah, it's just it's just one of those things where being respectful goes a long way.
Yeah, and honestly, I think that it can be a refreshing change of pace, especially if you live in places where there is high tension between the community and police officers. We were talking earlier, and I suggested the idea of having officers visit schools in their community once a year just to touch base with the schools and talk to the entire school there and just teach them how to deal with police officers, how police officers can be helpful. Let's bring back the Mr. Rogers view of police, where not only are they there to protect and serve, but they can tell you where the post office is.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
mean, and I think that needs to be an effort by police departments across the country to show the community that they're trustworthy. But I think the opposite is also true. The community needs to show that they are trustworthy around their cops.
Yeah, absolutely. There needs to be both sides. Um, some way of reforming their behavior because obviously there are bad cops out there. No one's denying that. It's just I get pretty offended when people. Here I am, a justice warrior right now, but it is.
And I don't think it's the same thing though,
Yeah,
because here, um, it's a matter of life and death. Honestly, this
yeah,
isn't a this isn't a discussion about politics or policy.
yeah,
This is a matter of, you know, with high tensions and bad attitudes,
yeah.
people could die.
Exactly. I mean, with everybody, let me rephrase what I said. Basically, we're not we're not. It's okay to get offended by certain things, but when it's everything,
And when it shuts down the conversation at hand, is when you're being a social justice warrior. There's a difference. You can be offended and obstinate, but at the end of the day, you still have to come to the table and talk about it and be respectful of one another instead of shutting conversation down.
absolutely. And I just think that would bring our society a whole lot like more. Instead of going in the wrong direction backwards, I think it will bring us forwards if we can all come to the table like adults and have a rational conversation.
Instead of self segregating by every qualifier we can name.
I know we already have enough as it is, enough segregation through race, political ideology, religion, what you name it, anything. They'll you automatically and their ideals. They think you automatically hate them, and that's not exactly the truth. Actually, that's not even close to the truth.
No, and honestly, I think that really the use of all these qualifiers of gender, of race, of religion, these are all ways that they bring up to divide us, to keep us unfocused and ununified. So we can talk about the same three subjects over and over and over without getting into honest policy questions, questions about our national security, questions about our economy. When they don't want us asking those questions. Instead, rather us be asking about whether or not Kanye West or Taylor Swift is better. You know, they would they would rather us be focused on petty little disputes like that, and that's not even a race related issue.
No, I mean we could have an enemy that could just flat. This is worst case scenario, obviously. Like they could nuke us while we're meanwhile we're arguing over gender politics, gender identity. They could just laugh at us and just launch that nuke away.
Yeah, I mean it's stupid. I mean, take this Iranian deal for example that passed. You know, we could be talking about that, but instead we're stuck talking about petty little disputes over gender, over who can use what bathroom. We're stuck talking about whether or not gay people should be allowed to be married. We're stuck talking about all these things that don't really matter, and it keeps us away from real issues. It keeps us away from keeping track of our congressmen. It keeps us away from talking about policy. It keeps us away from talking about uh, real substantive issues facing our society.
I agree wholeheartedly. That I mean we need. I think it's obviously something. I think I'm optimistic. It's going to change. I think it's because of social media being so accessible to a lot more people. You're going to have a lot of people who are into the intellectual field, the people who are in the rational field, then you're going to have a lot of morons who never had a voice before get a voice, and they realize that they have,
Like us.
yeah, like us, like they have a form of power now, and they just want to use it. You know what I mean? They have a crappy job. They have a crappy relationship. Crappy, like they have bad relationships in their life. They have no friends or whatever, and they're just angry about other things. It's not all of them, obviously, but that probably contributes, and they just want to bring someone else down. It's just some people just love bringing someone else down.
I must admit to occasionally relishing in a good debate victory, but but that's just par for the course there, But there are people who just browse the YouTube comments just to call somebody out. It's like, and it always actually bugs me and takes away from the experience when you're looking at like a video or an article of something totally unrelated, and all of a sudden, there's a discussion about whether or not somebody's racist in the comment section. You're just like, why is this even occurring? I'm watching a video of cats, for crying out
That's a
loud.
troll right there. That's a troll.
Do not feed the trolls, folks. Do not feed
Yeah,
the
dude,
trolls.
you will not win. Anyways, that's our thoughts. We'll get back to you guys pretty soon.
And probably on a more cohesive message.